out with our very first panel and our very first panelist. We're going to get you mic'd up right now. And right behind you, right there, you'll see our colleagues do have the mics ready to bring you up on stage. Our first panel is Art in Web3. Now, what does that mean? So we have combined two different mediums, if you will, actually multiple mediums. If you like to come see art here at the Southampton Art Center, you can come into wonderfully air-conditioned rooms and look at art, which happen to be through those main doors right there off to the side. And you will have a chance to see art from some of our panelists that are here up on stage. Art in Web3 is being moderated by Christiane, Professor of School and Media Studies, and our panelists are Giovanna Sun, LoVid, Tommy Mintz, Paul Miller, and who is AKA DJ Spooky. If you come up right up here on the stairs, right on the, just be careful stepping up. These artists, you can see them inside here at the Southampton Art Center, and we will have them up on stage, certainly if you have any questions for them and or to speak about their projects that are inside the Southampton Art Center. They'll be available for conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a warm welcome and applause for day number 2 at Hamptons Tech Week. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming out today. And I'm very excited about moderating this panel with some really amazing artists in the field and beyond. And I actually want to start off by very briefly introducing them. So we have here Tali Hinkes from LoVid, which was established in 2001 as a collaboration between Tali and Kyle Lapidus. Their work has been shown internationally in galleries ranging from Postmasters and Bitforms in New York, and the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts and Jewish Museum in New York, but also at the New Museum, ICA London. So widely exhibited, and LoVid basically made their name with, as the title of the collaborative suggests, low video and glitch. So we're going to hear from Tali. Also here we have Tommy Mintz, who received his degrees from Sarah Lawrence College and CUNY in Queens, and is an assistant professor of photography at CUNY Kingsborough. And his work has been also exhibited locally, nationally, and internationally at various kinds of venues, and really explores aesthetics and concepts of street photography, collage, mapping, and digital culture. And most recently, he has been working on his automated digital photo collage, an algorithm that analyzes sequential images for differences and creates collages. So we're going to hear from Tommy. Then we have Paul Miller right next to me. DJ Spooky hardly needs an introduction. You know, very well-known composer, multimedia artist, and writer. So you may be familiar with some of his works. His 2018 album, DJ Spooky Presents Phantom Dance Hall, which debuted as number 3 on Billboard, and his multimedia performance piece, Rebirth of a Nation, is also very well known. Paul also currently is an artist in residence at Yale, and we're going to hear more from him. And last but not least, because she's very involved in the NFT space, is Giovanna. And let me, oops, I'm losing. So Giovanna is an artist and curator and really an NFT and blockchain advisor who has worked with many startups to help them getting things off the ground. And she utilizes AI, generative apps, and glitch software, and open data images for various series she has been creating, among them Trans Utopia and Trans Nation. So I'm very excited about hearing from all of them. I just want to kick it off with a few remarks about Web3 and the art landscape. I think there are many challenges we're facing, many misunderstandings we're facing, and hopefully we can tease that out a little bit and then continue the conversation with you. So when we're talking about Web3, I've meeting people coming from two camps, one of them understanding Web3 really as a new form of the web that will be driven by the blockchain, and then others who are coming more from the developer angle and understanding it more comprehensively as something involving the blockchain, metaverse, AR, etc. So there's a little bit of confusion in that terminology. As you all know, we have experienced a massive shift last year with the NFT boom that happened. But NFTs also have been around since 2014, when Kevin McCoy and Anil Dash did a presentation at the New Museum for Monographs, Monetized Graphics, which were really meant to give artists an opportunity to sell their works. We also have been seeing a lot of experimentation with the blockchain as a medium. It was in 2017 that Furtherfield in London already published a book, Artists Rethinking the Blockchain. And what happened last year, I think, was the start of a bit of confusion, because what we're seeing in the landscape is mostly JPEGs and little video clips hung on the blockchain, and that is equated with digital art. But digital art has a long, long history, more than 50 years. It has been collected, it has been sold with traditional certificates of authenticity in the six figures. So we're navigating a space here where there's a lot of confusion about what constitutes art. For me, as a curator, I'm the curator of digital art at the Whitney Museum. It's most interesting to see artists using the blockchain as a medium in generative ways. For museums, it's much less interesting to look at JPEG derivatives of massive XR works they already have in their collection or they're about to acquire. And it will be very interesting to see how things develop. A lot of work still needs to be done when it comes to smart contracts, for example, which are not up to the museum level. So on that background, Tali, why don't you kick it off with your experiences, and then we hear from Paul and Tommy and Giovanna, since she's most involved in this landscape. I think she will be a good transition into the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Christiane, and thanks for everyone who helped organize and everyone's here. I just want to briefly, actually, it's great echoing some of what Christiane was saying. So as LoVid, we've been working together for over 20 years, and actually our work primarily originated with revisiting analog synthesizers and analog instruments 20 years ago, which were already then kind of 20 years dated in terms of it was not the current, most recent technology. But what we did is, as younger artists at the time, we said, wait a second, there's this whole other way of doing digital art, media-based art, moving image. And so we basically went back in time and rebuilt these analog synthesizers to create work that was, for us, was very personal, because we made our instruments by ourselves. It's a lot of hardware. I have two pieces in the show if you wanted to see. So the patterns in these prints are made with these analog instruments. So for us as LoVid, it's always been very important for us to not only create work, but in some sense be part of the systems that make our work. And so that can mean technically building software or hardware, but also continuously thinking of how do we distribute our work. So for someone working in time-based media, to just expand the term of digital art to other, electronic arts in general, it's always the question. Our work has been centered a lot on performances and live events and screenings and installations. So for the longest time, the idea of collection is not always it's just not a part of has not been a part of the conversation for us, because it was a lot of times centered about ephemeral things and experiences that you have to sort of be there. And a lot of the work that we do, even when they take a form of an object, has that the question, what stays and how can we capture a moment, a fleeting moment, a technological experience, being on the internet, how can we capture all these feelings with a physical object? So this is a little bit, so I really do come from the, video, and I've worked with many institutions. My single channel works are distributed by Experiential Art Intermix, EAI, that are big catalog of video art, and, I've done exhibitions, etc. And so, and I really do my best to be very mindful and have a lot of intention of what work is distributed in what way. And so when the big boom of NFT started, we're close friends with Kevin. We've heard a lot about it. We're very involved in, work is in New York City. So obviously the conversation of blockchain has been around us, but we haven't really participated in it. And so the first thing that I was just kind of absorbing, taking it all in, seeing all the kind of chaos that was kind of February 2020, I want to say, I'm not sure the dates exactly. And so the first piece that I created, the biggest body of work that we have until now with NFTs, is a series called Hugs on Tape. And it was a response to the pandemic, but also a lot of what I saw in terms of what type of work was presented. And a lot of it was, I saw that it was this kind of feeling of solitude. We were all alone, artists making kind of self-portraits or figures that seemed very solitary. And so because of our experience in performances and really doing things with people, which is always the most inspiring thing for me, the series Hugs on Tape is a series of NFTs or digital animations that have been distributed as NFTs, and they originate from kind of crowdsource. I asked various people to send me videos of a hug, and they send it. At the time, people were just in their pod, so with family, with loved ones, and then I reanimate them really kind of almost by hand using patterns from our analog synthesizer. And so distributing these hugs on the blockchain and on social media became this, I kind of half jokingly called it like social emotional tokens, because, there's social tokens is something in the Web3 space that is interesting to me. So it's the idea that you can kind of distribute burst of joy, a connectedness when in the time of isolation. And the series continues because I'm sort of not done talking about hugs. There's a lot there. So I hope you check it out at some point. And then I just want to briefly, before, I don't want to take too much of your time, but so now the next step for me is thinking more about Web3. What are really the potentials with that? Christiane mentioned a little bit of using art that exists on the blockchain. So we are for the first time expanding from our analog instruments that are generative to doing generative pieces with platforms. So we're working with a platform called EAT Works. It's a company group. We'll be kind of engaged in conversation with them. The interesting thing about Web3 that I see happening is that place like EAT Works or other platforms have kind of want to learn from the experiences of Web 1, Web 2, not repeat the same mistakes. And in many cases, they want to place artists in the center of their development and research.
Thanks so much, Tali. So, Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about your work as it connects to this space?
Sure. First and foremost, I just want to say it's one of the hottest summers in history, and I'm fascinated with the intersection of complexity and the human experience of how we think about experience as it's transmitted to each other. So, to me at least, the oldest technology we have is storytelling. If you go to the Lascaux Caves in France, if you see any of the oldest paintings human beings have ever made, there's a trace of that human intentionality to convey meaning. And I think right now, especially as we move further into a climate crisis, technologists tend to have a very utopian vision of how technology relates to the world around us. But obviously, say, for example, to make a Bitcoin, which causes a tremendous amount of pollution, causes a tremendous amount of energy consumption. So there's always these latent and ancillary after effects to technology. And so it's never neutral. So the work I have in the exhibition is called Techspressionism. It's in the museum right now. I work with robots while I'm going to be at Yale. The robots are making my paintings. And what I'm doing is sending them a series of quantum physics equations, mainly based on Schrodinger and a couple other major theoreticians in the 20th century. And if you think about what makes the 20th versus the 21st century different, it's not that we have new stuff, because most of the stuff we're using for computers and stuff comes out of World War II. And if you think about it, World War II was kind of an information warfare. For example, Alan Turing, who's generally considered to be the inventor of the computer, we really need to update the way we think about these kinds of networks that surround the creative act. And that's kind of what I'm working on for the series of projects that the painting that's in the exhibition is kind of related to. All right, so I also think we're in the middle of a crisis of representation. If you think about it, the physical world versus the digital world, where is the overlap? Most people spend more time with their cell phones than they do with other people. And on top of that, the data that's coming through your kind of cell phone and re-engineers your brain at every level. There's a lot of studies that show stuff like TikTok, stuff like Instagram. These are all addiction engines. And what they do is they monetize your attention and keep you on the platform. And that's how their business model works. So as an artist, I'm very intrigued with how art and finance and perception overlap. If you think about it, most of this is speculation. If you think about it, what is an NFT except just kind of a condensed speculation on the value of something in the near future? So too with the futures market, so too with the stock market, so too with the value of any kind of painting or sculpture or whatever. So as we move further into the 21st century, we're moving into a more and more etherealized cultural space. And that's where, to me at least, art has a really good position to leverage change in how technology surrounds us. The problem with the 21st century isn't that there's a scarcity. In fact, one could argue, I'd love to put this out there, anything that can be digital will be digital. So the social networks around us can be quantified, our interactions with our fellow human beings can be quantified. Whatever you do, trust me, they're going to be working on trying to digitize that. So how does art fit into that kind of narrative structure? To me, at least, this is one of the most pressing questions of the early 21st century. And considering we're here at a conference about Web3 and the idea that people are moving into these kinds of cultural spaces, metaverses, and so on, the digital kind of content that we generate, the digital trace that we generate, with every interaction with every network around us, whether it's LTE for your cell phone, whether it's the data networks and servers that are used for Facebook or Instagram and so on, all of that is a relational aesthetic, and things can be changed. Data is never permanent. In fact, it's always radically changing. So I'm a big fan of this idea of impermanence. I'm a big fan of how this notion of how digital culture is kind of moving us further and further into a world where what Marx would have said, all that is solid melts into the air. That's a famous phrase from Marx, Das Kapital, if anyone's into that, from the good old 19th century. So fast forward to 2022, we're coming out of the pandemic, and during the pandemic, so many people pivoted to digital immersive media at every level to try and re-engage their social space. And I think that anyone in the audience, you can relate to this because we had a sense of disassociative context. And so the tension between context and content, how we think about that, that's what, again, is being monetized for billions and billions of dollars every day as we move further into the 21st century. So I want to just kind of riff on that for a moment. But when you think about current projects, I always want to make sure that the audience realizes that art is one of the most powerful tools human beings have to leverage change. And to me, at least, there's a very famous phrase from the former minister of oil in Saudi Arabia. He said, the Stone Age didn't end for lack of stone. It ended because people had better ideas. And we're now in this kind of a transitional point. I'm a big fan of people like Marshall McLuhan on one hand, but I'm also a big fan of someone like Gavin Wood, who's the co-founder of Ethereum, and he coined the term Web3. And so when he was working on Ethereum and also his other blockchain project called Polkadot, Ethereum is very different than Bitcoin. And the way it is because you're thinking about a platform of applications. Bitcoin is essentially a product of someone who we don't even know exists, Satoshi Nakamoto. And he's a fictional character for all we know. So I'm fascinated with that because it's this currency that came out of nowhere. That's a mathematical series of engagements. It's anonymous, but it's still traceable at every level. And the person who created it, we're not even sure exists. I mean, it's very 21st century. It's a great way of thinking about things. So, long story short, I'm going to be kind of riffing on that for the next series of art projects I'm working on. Most of the work I'm dealing with right now is thinking about these kinds of areas both in sound and art as we move further into these digital networks. If you get a moment, I'd love to encourage you, please check out the painting inside. It's called, basically all things being equal, ceteris paribus is a Latin term. And everything, it looks like it's a hand-done painting, but it's actually a group of robots that were responding to quantum physics equations. So there we go.
Thank you so much, Paul. Lots of interesting ideas to pick up on, which we hopefully will be able to do later. Tommy, do you want to continue the conversation?
I'd love to continue what Paul was talking about this idea of maybe ephemerality and our interactions in this Web3 or virtual world that we've all been sort of pushed into over the last 2 years. I'm also one of the artists in the Techspressionism exhibit, and Techspressionism is something that came about during this pandemic time. Artists were isolated and unable to get together physically, which gave us time to start to gather on Zoom, talking about each other's work virtually. And I feel like that opened up a lot of connections that were very powerful, but also very ephemeral. And that's a really interesting place to be as an artist. What are we generating? How long is it for? Who are we making it for? Was always sort of very defined. You have a thing you're making, it's going to be permanent, it'll stay around after you're dead, right? And it's always in a place, in a museum that people can go and visit. Now we're working in these spaces that are yet to be defined. Whether it is VR or AR spaces, or it's just a slideshow on your phone. Opens up really a whole bunch of new questions about what are we making, for who, for when, and why. So I've been working digitally for over 20 years as well, thinking about what is the original in a digital artwork. And there's always a translation. So I have 2 dye sublimation on aluminum prints in the show currently, and that translation from the original digital to the print is exactly that, a translation. And now that we have this medium where we're all interacting digitally and looking at our own viewports into this digital world, the digital art doesn't need translation to be viewed anymore. And I think that's a fascinating thing, where we can take our digital work and just present it as that. So, gosh, it's very exciting, and it's very exciting to hear how other artists are utilizing this and seeing, and I encourage everybody both to see the physical show here, but also join the Techspressionism salons that meet every Wednesday evening, which is actually going to be tonight.
Thank you so much. We actually only have 5 minutes left, I was just told, so, it would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm also one of the artists that I show my NFT inside Southampton Art Center, which I feel so grateful and appreciate. I sold 2,000 NFTs last year, but I paint things in age 3 or 5, but I mean, no one really cares, not until I start to create NFTs. So what I think about NFT is truly decentralized. No matter how old you are, how young you are, you can do it everywhere with your mobile phone, your tablet, and you can showcase everywhere with the augmented reality. You immerse into the everywhere the environment. And also, this is the physical pen that I already sold the NFT. So I make a lot of physical products based on NFT. So this is why we are come from Web 2 space, we jump to Web 3. And it's so funny that on the one hand, that NFT is a smart contract. Non-fungible token. That's like I see all these possible thing that all the creator, you can prove you're the creator. This is authentic. And while you can also get more idea when you create more paintings or image, video, or like a music loop, whatever, you can make that like a physical. So this is so exciting that we get into the Web3 space. And I feel like this is opportunities for everyone. Everyone can be creator. Everyone can be artist. No matter where you are, and you see art everywhere, and you create art everywhere.
Thank you so much. Since we have very little space, and I hope we can that is, space hopefully more, and we can continue the conversation in person. I just want to synthesize a few ideas from. I don't think we have time for that. I just want to synthesize a few ideas and then see if we can take questions down there. Starting with some of the challenges that Paul has brought up. You brought up environmental issues. I think that's going to be, or is one of the challenges we're facing. There's absolutely no need to create more technologies that wreak havoc on our environment. And this is a top issue for artists, many of them having done environmental work. So they simply will not go on any platform that is proof of work and not proof of stake, and we need some major shifts here. Paul also was the one who pointed out one important distinction. NFTs ultimately are certificates of authenticity with a connected smart contract and a sales mechanism. We're using the term NFT art, while art very often is not intrinsically connected to that. And I think one of the challenges, also as Giovanna points out, challenges and potential is really using the blockchain as a medium. To your point of decentralization, this is the great hope, and it's certainly happening to some extent. Every Web3 developer will also tell you, oh man, you're dealing with so many third-party dependencies as never before in developing, you know. So here you have, once again, this tension between centralization and decentralization. Finally, another thing that all of you have brought up is history. I would encourage everyone to look at the history of the digital medium, because it's not like we're entering the metaverse right now. We're in phase 3 of VR, AR. Myron Kruger in the 70s ultimately did this type of work. We have seen so many ideas fail, and I think it would be great not to repeat all of that. And on that note, I don't know if we have another minute for comments or...
Oh, we do. We have a question here from the audience, if that's
wonderful.
Okay. Is that
Absolutely. Okay? If we have time for that.
All right. Well, this is Jean. We met at our after party yesterday, and Jean is a gallerist, and I know that he had a question for the crew.
DJ Spooky, hello there. Question. The work that you're doing sounds really interesting, and you talked about art being the most relatable of human connections. And I'm wondering, with Web3 and the blockchain and NFTs and using the integration of computers, and how you think that we can get more together or relatable as humans.
I'm glad you asked it. Thank you so much. I'd love to also bounce that to the rest of the audience. But when I was a kid growing up, one of my favorite movies was Blade Runner. And people tend to forget Blade Runner was set in the year 2020. I'm like, where's all the spaceships? We should have our own robots and replicants, and everybody should, be relaxing while the robots do the work. But obviously Putin or Russia or Ukraine has some issues there. So to make a long story short, art, if you think about it, the global climate crisis is part of what I view as hyper-consumerism. And the reason people are being told and sold over and over that we need more of everything and we have to keep consuming, and that then drives other market forces, which then drives a fossil fuel-based economy, and so on and so on. But what's interesting about this kind of conference is that we're taking a moment of reflection. To me, art is that moment of reflection. And I personally, the climate crisis has really brought home that if we don't play our cards right, our existence as a species is unquestioned. So it's been fascinating to see. Don't forget, the internet as we know it basically was invented. I know this might sound shocking, but in 1969, at the heart of the Cold War, it was called ARPANET. And so, amusingly enough, the U.S. military needed a method to send messages. Because if there was a nuclear war, which a good old threat of a nuclear war is always good for innovation. People tend to. So if you fast forward to Tim Berners-Lee in 1989, he invented the web. I always want to make sure that the audience remembers the web is different than the internet. So Sir Tim Berners-Lee was at CERN in Switzerland, and they were generating so much data with each experiment So he needed a method of indexing and organizing that information, and that's where you call hypertext markup language, HTML.